Not all of industry is trying to destroy the environment, obviously, and conservationists likewise are not intent to kill industry. That's a quote I read 2 weeks ago in the Globe and Mail, and the reporter's, his point was he had attended a climate change forum discussion, and he said once the group got beyond that type of divisive thinking, that's when everybody's work could really begin. I've seen a lot of great work here this morning so far, and we've used many of these products, and I look forward to using some of the other things that are yet to come out. So my story here today is I'm going to tell you our top 3 stories about how different industries have embraced meeting the Migratory Birds Convention Act. These are for my best clients who aren't afraid to try new things, to learn new things, and to do innovative approaches. Not saying we have it all figured out, but definitely we've had some successes that I want to share with you. Now, a little bit about us. Who are we, EDI? We study living things and where they live, and we've been working, assisting our clients with wildlife mitigation for the past 20 years. In the last 5 and even 10 years is when I've been involved in bird mitigation, and so that's really come up more frequently, I'd say, in the last 5 years, and our clients come back to us because we are able to provide them some practical solutions. We're not afraid to try new things and use new technologies as and when appropriate. Now, my first story for you, these are all anonymous in terms of the projects and the clients that they refer to. This is from my perspective. Seismic project. So in 2012, I had a client come to me anticipating that a seismic program, 3D low impact seismic program, would be occurring the following summer. And she wanted to anticipate this and do some prior proactive planning in terms of managing for it. She asked us to make a mitigation package for wildlife, focus on the birds, which did turn out to be the more challenging aspect of this mitigation package. A little bit about seismic. So on the left we have the receiver lines. So we have quite a high density of these receiver lines, which are just walking trails. But in this case, the first 2.5 months of the project is just about clearing these receiver lines and the source lines. Wrong button again, sorry. And these shot point areas here on the right, which are every 50 meters. So this entails someone power saw in many cases going through and making these walking lines and taking care of hazard trees, so to make it safe for the people later on, laying down these geophones on the receiver lines and then dropping the charges down drill holes that were done on these shot point lines. So that's a little bit about seismic. And so what could we do to plan? Well, what we did was a risk assessment approach. So using, in this case, we had a few data sources. Vegetation resources would be one of them. And we made very broad habitat classes. These are the habitat classes, and prioritized them according to what we thought was the highest risk for birds, which the top 2 categories were riparian and mixedwood forest. And another thing we did in the late winter is do aerial survey to find stick nests and mineral licks. The good thing about seismic is, and this on the left is an example of a little piece of the seismic project, a little bit of a scale there so you can see the density of those receiver and source lines. And the good thing is, though, there is a lot of flexibility in where you put those lines. So when we found stick nests, it was very practical and real that we could avoid cutting around those stick nests and leave a buffer. I'll just comment, the photo on the right is a mulched line, and a mulcher is a newer piece of equipment, looking back to the previous days of just using the D8 cat to clear these types of lines. And what we found, though, is that, and the next stage of the mitigation was, once we could avoid and alter timing of certain things, is actually searching for nests and preventing them being disturbed. However, on the mulcher lines, there was a lot more disturbance than we expected on either side of the line, just from debris flying, essentially. And those ones, it turned out, it was not practical whatsoever to survey them to find nests in that wide of an area in a way that the vegetation clearing could continue in the summer. So those ones were delayed until after the breeding season and were cleared after the fact, and they could focus on the smaller lines. So as I said, we went and searched for nests in the areas that were cleared in the summer. They had some rational reasons for clearing vegetation in the summer, which you could ask me about in the questions or later. And I'll give you some statistics in our searching for nests. So this overall area was 350 square kilometers of the entire seismic area. We surveyed 778 linear kilometers, which was 457 hectares. So that's these narrow lines with a buffer on either side. And the survey effort overall averaged 2.11 hectares per hour per surveyor. Through our pre-planning, we knew there was 192 species that were known to possibly occur in the region. And we documented 127 of those species. And this period was from June 7th to August 1st. We identified 200 active nests, and 35 of those, by the way, we didn't pinpoint the location of. We didn't need to go that far, but we knew there was a nest in an area and we could provide a buffer around it that wasn't cleared until the nestlings had fledged. That, by the way, turned out to be, on average, we found 0.44 active nests per hectare. And here's some other little statistics that, of course, we were surveying early in the morning, as that's when you expect to find the most bird behavior so that you can find nests. But we found that it was actually 11 to 12 a.m. where we ended up finding the most nests. And on the right, just a little graph showing the type of nests we found. We tested out using thermal imaging camera to try and enhance our ability to find nests. And that, another question you can ask me later about that. And that leads me on to story 2. So story 2, in story 1, provided a mitigation plan for a large project ahead of time. In story 2, client asked me in 2015 to make a plan for multiple projects. So in this case, this is a gas play in a business unit where they're anticipating, if we get a final investment decision, there's going to be a flurry of drilling activity in this area, and we want to have some tools to be able to manage that. This on the right, this picture is just an example of a different area, Marcellus play, and it just gives you an idea for the number of drills. And so the type of projects and disturbances we were thinking about was all of the roads and leases and pipelines associated with those drilling activities once the market conditions were favorable for that final investment decision. Now, so we don't know in this case where the project would be located, where the footprints would be exactly, and we don't know when. So what do we know? Well, we knew we could use existing information such as breeding bird atlas, BCR species to figure out what species we might have in the region, because we had at least a business unit or a region to look at. And we knew when those species were nesting. We knew about the RNest data that had come out, and we were able to use that data, which was excellent. And okay, so what this does, this is the overall package that we ended up creating for our client, where we have over here the environmental data that we have, the existing information. Out of that, we figured out the bird species, their relative abundance in the region, weighted into the habitats and the timing window. We could come up with a nesting potential. Together with that, we created a tool in ARC where the nesting potential was part of the formula, and the client could enter the project timing and the project footprint, so the shapefile, and come out without a nesting risk. And from there, develop a mitigation plan depending on that risk assessment. So this is an example of the data we got from RNest and used the R scripting to manipulate this to provide that equation in our ARC tool. We had 203 species. We could also, by doing this species by species, we could identify those sensitive species. So that includes federal species at risk, provincial species at risk. And as far as where are they, we use the vegetation resource inventory to make, again, these broad habitat types, similar to the last example. And we associated those habitat types with each of that list of 192 species that we identified as being possibly occurring. In the result, we have an ARC tool, and like I say, you enter your project footprint shapefile, you enter the timing, and this is an example of a map you can get out of it. So where this leads is to be able to mitigate the risk that you can't avoid by adjusting all of the timing of your vegetation clearing. And another thing you can do is just assess what that looks like in July compared to August and September. What we have here is the number corresponds to this ranking, risk ranking. And associated with this data, we can also provide the number of birds in each of those habitat types and cumulative number of nesting days in each of those types, dependent on the timing that you enter into the tool. Now, I want to emphasize this fits into an overall package. It's helpful to have a package where you're doing your best avoidance up front. Then when you get down to further mitigation, you're doing the level of mitigation appropriate to the level of risk. So you have a higher risk, you do more intensive mitigation, and you have some tools that are options. It helps with practicality of implementing and operationalizing these mitigation plans. Now, in my third story, we work a fair bit in the mining industry, and this story is about making a plan for a mining company for their Canadian operations. So I was asked to do this, and it was operations in BC and Alberta, and it takes it that step further of having a guidance document, a strategic level guidance document that could be implemented consistently across their operations. That's what they were after. I'll just add, we work for various mining clients and providing mitigation in terms of when we're going through to do environmental impact assessment, the same things, altering timing, assessing risk, and applying mitigation according to risk. This involved that process, so the risk depending on the type of activity, the disturbance, the timing, and then, like I say, providing those mitigation tools that give options and make it possible to operationalize and carry out these mitigations on the ground. The mining sector is a little bit different. They are in the same spot for a continuum. They might be there for 5 to 30 to 50 years. And so it provides different challenges, because it doesn't mean you don't have species nesting right next to the mine site, which becomes a challenge to mitigate for when it is right next to an active mine site. Now, the conclusion. There are ways we can reduce the risk, and we have to look at it from a risk reduction point of view, I think. I've mentioned, I probably haven't mentioned all of the different tools that we've used, but things like the ABMI, the Breeding Bird Atlas, the Vegetation Inventory, either AVI or VRI, that we have available to us are all great tools. And I look forward to more tools that we can use. I hope that I've demonstrated by these stories that there is an embracing of the challenge of meeting the Migratory Birds Convention Act. My clients want to do that for sure, and aren't afraid to try new things and continuing learning and doing better. It's actually a pretty straightforward law. When you look at our range of environmentally related laws, it's pretty simple. Don't destroy or disturb nests. No problem. Another thing is we are, I hope, at least participating in bird conservation through awareness. So awareness is something that comes up in the bird conservation strategies repeatedly as an action to meet many of the challenges and risks. And that is something that's a central tenet to all of these mitigation practices. And I believe that really makes a difference and at least contributes to the bird conservation piece, which is a slightly different topic than the Migratory Birds Convention Act. With that, I conclude.